It's week 6 of our True Disciple series where we've been discussing John 13:35 that says, "They will know you are my disciples if you have love for one another." And so for the past few weeks we've been studying the practical aspects of what it means to love one another. And we've looked at putting others' needs before our own, bearing one another's burdens, praying for one another, encouraging one another. And today we're going to continue that idea and talk about sharpening one another. As we go into this topic, though, we have to get a clear understanding of what sharpening means. And so we actually see in Proverbs 27, verse 17, as iron sharpens iron, so a friend sharpens a friend. And so it gives us this picture. I'm even wearing this shirt for my friend's ministry, that this is his foundation to his ministry, because what we see here is iron sharpens iron. That literally means when you sharpen a knife, you take a piece of iron or a piece of steel, and you take another piece of steel, the knife, and you rub them against each other. And in that process, there's heat, there's friction, there's pain that happens. But what happens as well is the knife becomes sharper. It becomes a better tool used. And so when we look at this verse, what we see is as iron sharpens iron, so a friend sharpens a friend. And so two friends, they come together and they sharpen each other. Sometimes there's going to be heat and friction, and there's going to be hard things that we need to say to one another. The whole point is to sharpen one another, to make each other better believers. And so as we look at this verse of John 13:35, they will know you are my disciples if you love one another. We're trying to sharpen one another in loving one another, and how to do that more effectively. And so there's some things, though, to understand when we are sharpening one another. First of all, it is a friend to a friend. We see in 1 Corinthians 5 that we are not to judge the outsider, the non-believer. We're not to take the word of God that they don't know, understand, or value and say, you are living in sin. Stop it. We are to go to love and care for them and preach the gospel of Jesus Christ to them. But when we see their life is out of line with the word of God, we go and preach the gospel, not judgment. But those of us that are believers within the church that say we believe in the word of God, when we look in it and we see something that's off in someone's life, then we have both the right and the responsibility to go and sharpen them, to go to them in love. Ephesians says it that way, to share truth in love. And so we have the right and the responsibility to go to them, share the truth of the word of God in a loving way in order to sharpen them. And sometimes there might be heat and friction. That's just part of sharpening one another, that the person might not like it, that it might not be fun, it might be uncomfortable, but we do it to sharpen one another. And so this week we're going to read about sharpening one another, how to sharpen one another, what people in the Bible do to sharpen one another. So while you're doing that, I want you to ask yourself a few questions. I want you to ask, who in your life do you have the right and the responsibility to sharpen? Who are you sharpening? And if you are, or if you're not, but if you are, what have you been sharpening with? Has it been the Word of God? Has it been thoughts or emotions in your own heart? Has it been philosophies of this world? Or is it truly the Word of God that you have been using to sharpen one another? Or maybe you've just been knowing you should and cowering away and just dismissing it and hiding from actually doing it. Then I want you, while you're reading, to look at the different passages and things where we see people sharpening one another and ask, what are they sharpening others with? How are they sharpening them? And then finally following that up with, what do you need to do in response to this? How does your life look different than those in the Bible? And what do you need to learn and change in your life to be more like those men and women in the Bible that are sharpening one another? And then after you guys have done that, I want you to come together, parents and students, I want you to come together and talk about it, to sharpen one another, to build this relationship with the family unit that God designed, and sharpen one another. And through that, asking the 3 tough questions that we've been asking all this year of, how did you feed your soul? What did you learn this week? Taking those other questions we just asked about, while you've been reading, kind of processing what you're thinking of the sharpening things, and then talking about that together. What is God teaching you? And then, how did you feed your flesh? How did you struggle this week? What are some things that you just struggle with sin in? How can each of you help each other not sin in those ways? How did you struggle? How do you see points in your own life that you need to be sharpened? How can you sharpen others in your life? And what's God teaching you through that? And then finally, how did you feed others this week? This is the foundation principle of what Jesus is that we go, we preach, we baptize, disciple, we make disciples. How are you not doing that? And so as a family unit, how can you take this principle of sharpening one another and bring it into your life together? And then I want you to show up next Wednesday, where we're gonna continue this discussion on sharpening one another on Wednesday night with your leaders, with your friends, coming together and creating a friend group where you pray for one another, where you encourage one another, where you sharpen one another, all for the purpose of becoming more like Christ and proving to the world that we're true disciples by loving one another. And so I hope that you'll join us. I hope that you'll get in the reading plan this week. I hope that you will get before God and pray about what God is teaching you. Talk about it, creating true friends through your parents, as well as your students, as well as your friend group that is at school and at church, and become the true disciples that we are supposed to be by loving one another.